Amnesty reports that 450 to 500 civilians and 185 members of the security services have been killed. UNICEF estimates that 58 schools have been destroyed. 47 political leaders are being held without charge. And a recent Amnesty report refers to, and I quote, arbitrary arrests, torture, unlawful killings and the destruction of property. The Catholic Bishops' Conference has called it, quote, inhuman, blind, monstrous violence. And of the October election, Archbishop Samuel Cleda, the president of the Bishops' Conference, says, one has the impression election results are decided before voting takes place. My Lords, we can all share in these horrendous statistics, but what I want to do is this evening focus on what conclusions we can draw from the United Kingdom's dismal approach to this situation. More than ever, with Britain's potential departure from the European Union, we must seek to define our role in the world. And it would be helpful to know from the Noble Baroness Minister whether, for instance, human rights issues were assessed before, for instance, the New Age natural gas deal was announced, what consideration has been given to targeted sanctions, and whether this crisis figures in the Foreign Secretary's recent commitment on atrocity prevention. My Lords, the government mustn't suggest that this is a level playing field conflict in a civil war between equal sides. Too often in the past, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, in Darfur, the United Kingdom chose the path of moral equivalence, hinting that both sides were as bad as each other is the easy way out. In a previous generation, this was known as appeasement. Moral equivalence signals that we cannot be expected to pass judgment on which side is more to blame for the conflict. Instead, we issue the usual calls for the cessation of violence and a negotiated settlement, or we frame political conflicts as if they were natural disasters requiring aid, and we're very generous at sending aid rather than political solutions. At its worst, in Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, we have portrayed the persecution of unarmed civilians by repressive governments as a result of ancient ethnic hatreds, thereby dehumanising the victims and denying the legitimacy of the protesters who yearn for the rights that we take for granted. By citing ancient ethnic hatreds, we absolve ourselves of the obligation under international law to stop the killing. It's also disingenuous to defend our tepid response by claiming that the circumstances present us with a simple binary choice between wringing our hands in dismay or putting British boots on the ground. This is to ignore the potential for soft power available to the international community, be it concerted and sustained diplomatic pressure, carefully targeted sanctions, or international justice. The grievances fueling the violence in Cameroon did not erupt overnight. We had plenty of warning, but we chose not to listen to Cameroon's Anglophone minority. Anglophones represent 20% of the population, but for years there was only one Anglophone member of the 36-person cabinet in Yaoundé, just one example of their systematic marginalisation. My Lords, we shouldn't underestimate the influence we have, but it speaks volumes that we left it to the American ambassador to express his disapproval of the Cameroonian government's brutal response to peaceful protests. For decades, the Francophone government has ignored the pleas of moderate representatives of civil society, such as church leaders. Calls for a federal solution were ignored by President Biya 36 years in power, fueling the calls for secession and thereby polarising opinion. Breaking point came when the Francophone government sought to impose French laws in the French language in Anglophone courts and sent Francophone teachers speaking French into English schools. They responded to peaceful protest with disproportionate force. The International Crisis Group reports that a government helicopter, for instance, hovered outside a church, shooting Anglophone worshippers as they emerged from Mass. Inevitably, disproportionate actions led to the current escalation. In the face of all this, my Lords, there is nothing admirable about being even-handed in the face of the suffering of the Anglophone community. The United Kingdom should support the Anglophone community's peaceful civil society leaders in seeking genuine and inclusive talks. We need a targeted strategy for atrocity prevention and, my lords, a commitment to bring to justice those responsible for human rights violations wherever they occur.
My lord,
avec émotion l'assassinat de 4 militaires camerounais et de 2 policiers dans le sud-ouest.
This is Comrade Fonton Daniel speaking here from the great state of Texas here in the United States, and that is the president of the neighboring country, La Republique du Cameroun. It is not out of the blue that the people of Southern Cameroon and the fellow citizens of Southern Cameroon choose to arm its citizens against the atrocity that has been inflicted upon the citizens of Southern Cameroon. This is the key message that erupted by the president of that neighboring country, La Republique du Cameroun, declarations on the people of Southern Cameroon. Many citizens of Southern Cameroon across around the world, they were just sitting in their home going on with their normal business as normal activities here in the United States, Europe, Great Britain, South America, in Africa, and in Southern Cameroon territory as a whole. The people were living in a quiet moment. Of course, it has been an ongoing brutality of this regime, led by this brutal forebear of the neighboring country, La Republique du Cameroun. In fact, in 1982, he ascended into the throne of La Republique du Cameroun, his own kingdom, in which he colonized himself. Of course, the previous president, Amadou Ahidjo, has been in power for almost a decade, 25 years. There were never any democratic form of government or institution instituted in La Republique du Cameroun. Of course, when they took over, they uprooted the democratic institution that has prevailed in Southern Cameroon. First, Jungle Foncha. No, first, Endele. Second, Jungle Foncha. And thirdly, Ngumjua. Those were the leaders democratically elected by the people of Southern Cameroon to govern themselves. And when this brutal regime led by this Pobia and his previous predecessor, they saw the citizens of Southern Cameroon a stream or a farmland that they can harvest at any time at their will. Of course, in 1984, he abolished continued the same pattern of his former predecessor. And civil society, people of Southern Cameroon, as you listen from the former speaker, the member of the British Parliament, or British House of Commons, whatever it is, have just spoken. The people of Southern Cameroon were living in a quiet moment. But as you're going to listen in subsequent broadcasts in this message, he spoke himself. I am going to bring that message. He says he was going to try to francophonize the people of Southern Cameroon so that they replace the entire culture and civil society of the people of Southern Cameroon, an Anglo-Saxon way of life, to be replaced by a francophone. It was not a painful feeling for all the citizens of Southern Cameroon. We all share the same pain and suffering when we see our relatives being run down by the military commanded by this regime. This is the declaration he made on the people of Southern Cameroon, simply asking for what? A reform. A reform. In United States, people ask for reform. In every aspect, there is a reform. The people of Southern Cameroon just get up and feel the pain and the suffering of its citizens that we just left out back home. It is our pain that we see our people being overrun by this regime. Imagine you are a child and your neighbor just pop in and start shooting your children Of course, as a parent, you know the feeling you went through and your wife, and you must react. So the people of Southern Cameroon is not exception. They did exactly what they're supposed to do and support our citizens. Of course, France, the architects of African colonialism, and I'm sure I'm bringing details of those colonialism, they came to the aid of this. We'll expect the British government to come to our aid. Unfortunately, not always coming, but however, we need to dip our hands into the pocket and find out exactly what we can do. We cannot see our mothers, our sisters, our brothers being overrun by this brutal regime. In the case of colonialism, they had their independence in 1960. Southern Cameroon was not part of that territory. We had our own independence in 1961. La Republique wasn't. It was a joint two nations of the same identical power coming together, living under together. But unfortunately, they see us more of a conquered territory and that they can use the military and override at their will. And Mr. Secretary, the people of Southern Cameroon has gone through this pain and suffering for quite a number of time. It is time to recognize the people of Southern Cameroon, their right and privilege to live as an independent nation. It is doing good for the greater number, not to white coat the problems and let's move forward to the different administrations. This problem erupted during the end of President Obama's term of office, and it was continued throughout Donald Trump's term of office. Mr. Secretary of State, I understand your policy, but you have to understand that the people of Southern Cameroon have the right to decide on how to be governed. They have the choice and should not be superimposed upon them. This is the declaration of this brutal regime on the people of Southern Cameroon. Listen and see what happens next.
Notre pays. Suite à la disparition de ces si valeureux militaires et policiers, je voudrais présenter mes condoléances aux familles éprouvées, ainsi qu'à nos vaillantes forces de défense et de sécurité. Je pense que les choses sont désormais parfaitement claires pour tout le monde. Le Cameroun est victime des attaques à répétition d'une bande de terroristes se réclamant d'un mouvement sécessionniste. Face à ces actes d'agression, je tiens à rassurer le peuple camerounais que toutes les dispositions sont prises pour mettre hors d'état de nuire ces criminels et faire en sorte que la paix et la sécurité soient sauvegardées sur toute l'étendue du territoire national. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I'm sure you all listened to that message. That was a war.
J'ai appris.
That was a war he declared on the people of Southern Cameroon on returning, and expect the people of Southern Cameroon should fold their arms and watch it with their naked eyes. Stay tuned, don't go away.
Their atrocities. And we will continue to see the atrocities of the military. This afternoon. Their atrocities. This afternoon. And we will continue to see the atrocities of the military. This afternoon.
Those are entire village that was burned down. It's not just one of this. Those are one of the 1.2 million homes burned down by the military of this brutal regime. The people of Southern Cameroon did not expect this to happen. In fact, we have our own government, our own people. The people of Southern Cameroon have an independent government. Jongo Endele, Jongo Fonja, and Joa. Those were the independent prime minister of Southern Cameroon, duly elected by the people of Southern Cameroon. La Republique has none in any of its existence elect a prime minister, elect a head of government. It was from one brutal regime, dictator Amadou Ahidjo, to the current that has been in power for 39 years, if I'm not mistaken. The people of Southern Cameroon have got enough of this, Mr. Secretary. Stay tuned, don't go away.
On avait la possibilité de les intégrer directement dans le système francophone, qui était celui de la majorité du peuple, 80%. Mais je crois que les pays sont soucieux aujourd'hui d'affirmer leur identité. Et c'est pour ça que nous mettons sur pied un statut spécial qui reconnaît la spécificité de la zone anglophone, mais elle reste dans l'intégrité territoriale du Cameroun. Ça donne beaucoup de problèmes.
Please, if you, we understand.
I'm sure you listen to what he says. They wanted to erase the entire culture of Southern Cameroon and replace it with the Francophone system, in which he believed, has done a lot of problems, as they have anticipated. Mr. Secretary, the people of Southern Cameroon have got enough of this of La Republique du Cameroon. The population of Southern Cameroon is 8 million, if I'm not mistaken. They are more than the population of Equatorial Guinea, which is probably 2 million. So the people of Southern Cameroon and the land integrity of Southern Cameroon is more than Equatorial Guinea. The people of Southern Cameroon has the right and privilege to live as a sovereign nation without any coercion. Let's look what happens. When the people of Southern Cameroon ask for help, of course, help is not coming anywhere. But when the Francophones ask for help, of course, the French come to their aid. And you will see from these next messages. Dear Mr. Secretary, these are all military equipment, as you see just underneath me, are supplied by French. It's not up to 3 or 4 weeks ago. These military weaponry were supplied by the military of France to La Republique du Cameroun. And I can assure you that one of those equipment that were being donated were shot in Southern Cameroon territory. And I'm going to post Those are one of the equipment that was supplied by France in less than 2 months ago, military weapons that were sent by the French government to support its colony against the people of Southern Cameroon. One of those equipment was a security surveillance of drones that was sent to Southern Cameroon to monitor the Southern Cameroon territory. And that was supplied by French President Emmanuel Macron and his defense minister. I mean, it is not something that the people of Southern Cameroon should be taken lightly or for granted. Of course, in a military pact that was signed during the colonial administration, signed in the United States in San Francisco, 1946, if I'm not mistaken, the British government guaranteed that they're going to provide security on the people of Southern Cameroon. I am sure that similar signing ceremony provided by France to provide security on its own colonial territory, La Republique du Cameroun. When this military weaponry were being supplied by France to suppress the people of Southern Cameroon, just above me or in between me and you, those are our citizens slaughtered by La Republique du Cameroun. Of course, the pain and the suffering is still fresh to us. It's not a mistake that we should stand and fold our arms and watch in the blindfolding as the people being slaughtered. This was in Bali, in Southern Cameroon territory, that the military of La Republique du Cameroun went and slaughtered our citizens indiscriminately. When they were being accused, they went and burned the bodies, and the body were burned into ashes. Imagine you have your children and someone, your neighbor, come and attack the children. Of course, you will react. Citizens of Southern Cameroon and in and around the world felt the pain and suffering when La Republique du Cameroun invaded Southern Cameroon territory, as you just listened to the message declared by that country President Paul Biya. Southern Cameroon territory was never a conquered nor a colonial territory of La Republique du Cameroun. When La Republique got their independence in 1960, Southern Cameroon wasn't part of that country territory. Southern Cameroon in 1961, La Republique was not part of Southern Cameroon. So let's call a spade a spade. It is not a disgruntled. You cannot sit and choose and decide what you want. You have to consult. The people must be part of the discussion. You have the authority, Mr. Secretary, to call the people of Southern Cameroon that are here in the United States and elsewhere around the world to discuss this. You have the power to do so. You cannot sit and impose a foreign nation to control the people of Southern Cameroon because you want to please your friend, France. Sir, we all have bleeding. We all have blood. We all have human feelings. We all have pain equally like any other race group. Sir, we need a collaborative approach to the question of this crisis in Southern Cameroon. Dear Mr. Secretary, let me bring back one of another British spokesperson.
I too would like to thank my noble friend Lord Botan for initiating this debate and too for his passionate introduction. I don't want to repeat his excellent background to the complex and contested decolonisation process that he referred to, but as my noble friend Lord McConnell
7,000 refugees from Cameroon registered with the UNHCR. Thousands more have been forced to flee their homes and dozens of villages have been ethnically cleansed. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and High Commissioner for Refugees, 437,000 from the Anglophone regions have been displaced, whilst the charity Protection Approaches says that 3.3 million are in need of humanitarian assistance. Amnesty reports that 450 to 500 civilians and 185 members of the security services have been killed. UNICEF estimates that 58 schools have been destroyed. 47 political leaders are being held without charge. And a recent Amnesty report refers to, and I quote, arbitrary arrests, torture, unlawful killings, and the destruction of property. The Catholic Bishops' Conference has called it, quote, inhuman, blind, monstrous violence. And of the October election, Archbishop Samuel Cleda, the president of the Bishops' Conference, says, one has the impression election results are decided before voting takes place. My Lords, we can all share in these horrendous statistics, but what I want to do is this evening focus on what conclusions we can draw from the United Kingdom's dismal approach to this situation. More than ever, with Britain's potential departure from the European Union, we must seek to define our role in the world. And it would be helpful to know from the Noble Baroness the Minister whether, for instance, human rights issues were assessed before, for instance, the New Age natural gas deal was announced, what consideration has been given to targeted sanctions, and whether this crisis figures in the Foreign Secretary's recent commitment on atrocity prevention. My Lords, the government mustn't suggest that this is a level playing field conflict in a civil war between equal sides. Too often in the past, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, in Darfur, the United Kingdom chose the path of moral equivalence, hinting that both sides were as bad as each other is the easy way out. In a previous generation, this was known as appeasement. Moral equivalence signals that we cannot be expected to pass judgment on which side is more to blame for the conflict. Instead, we issue the usual calls for the cessation of violence and a negotiated settlement, or we frame political conflicts as if they were natural disasters requiring aid, and we're very generous at sending aid rather than political solutions. At its worst, in Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, we have portrayed the persecution of unarmed civilians by repressive governments as a result of ancient ethnic hatreds, thereby dehumanising the victims and denying the legitimacy of the protesters who yearn for the rights that we take for granted. By citing ancient ethnic hatreds, we absolve ourselves of the obligation under international law to stop the killing. It's also disingenuous to defend our tepid response by claiming that the circumstances present us with a simple binary choice between wringing our hands in dismay or putting British boots on the ground. This is to ignore the potential for soft power available to the international community, be it concerted and sustained diplomatic pressure, carefully targeted sanctions, or international justice. The grievances fueling the violence in Cameroon did not erupt overnight. We had plenty of warning, but we chose not to listen to Cameroon's Anglophone minority. Anglophones represent 20% of the population, but for years there was only one Anglophone member of the 36-person cabinet in Yaoundé, just one example of their systematic marginalisation. My Lords, we shouldn't underestimate the influence we have, but it speaks volumes that we left it to the American ambassador to express his disapproval of the Cameroonian government's brutal response to peaceful protests. For decades, the Francophone government has ignored the pleas of moderate representatives of civil society, such as church leaders. Calls for a federal solution were ignored by President Biya, 36 years in power, fueling the calls for secession and thereby polarising opinion. Breaking point came when the Francophone government sought to impose French laws in the French language in Anglophone courts and sent Francophone teachers speaking French into English schools. They responded to peaceful protest with disproportionate force. The International Crisis Group reports that a government helicopter, for instance, hovered outside a church, shooting Anglophone worshippers as they emerged from Mass. Inevitably, disproportionate actions led to the current escalation. In the face of all this, my Lords, there is nothing admirable about being even-handed in the face of the suffering of the Anglophone community. The United Kingdom should support the Anglophone community's peaceful civil society leaders in seeking genuine and inclusive talks. We need a targeted strategy for atrocity prevention and, my Lords, a commitment to bring to justice those responsible for human rights violations wherever they occur.
History has not forgotten that Buea was the headquarters of West Cameroon. History has not forgotten that Buea was the capital of Southern Cameroons. And history has not forgotten that Buea was once the capital of German Cameroon. That is why I say that Buea is a historic town. I am proud, very proud to be in Buea, proud to walk on the same soil like our heroes.
Dear Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you have some idea about what he is saying, and it's not exceptionally different. Southern Cameroon has its own government, and he called it wars. What happened? Why did it become a wars? Of course, Southern Cameroon has a government, a democratic elected government of the West Cameroon, the first of its kind in West Africa as a whole. Imagine the first democratic institution in West Africa has been uprooted and replaced by the French system because the interest of France is more of a priority, because minerals were discovered in Southern Cameroon. And so therefore, it requires a possibility that for France to be able to control those oils, they must have to use La Republique du Cameroun. And that is why La Republique became the liaison between La Republique and the French government to initially uproot the government that existed, a democratic government existed in Southern Cameroon. It is in fact an outrageous to see that the people of Southern Cameroon asking for a fact, and yet the world doesn't see this. They see their own personal egoistic interests. They want to superimpose upon the people of Southern Cameroon. We totally denounce this behavior, that our people deserve their own sovereignty to be recognized. In fact, Equatorial Guinea, as I keep on referring to, their population is not up to 3 million, but yet their government is recognized. Their sovereignty is recognized. The people of Southern Cameroon were being betrayed by the British government, ignored the key factor. United Nations Resolution 1540 XV called for decolonization. It did not call for partial decolonization. It called for complete decolonization. And therefore, the people of Southern Cameroon meet those criteria of decolonization. I don't see any differences that the people of Southern Cameroon cannot have the right and privilege over their own territory that they can manage. Mr. Secretary, I understand you have your own policy, but in fact, let's call a spade a spade. Let's recognize the people of Southern Cameroon, their right. The people of Southern Cameroon cannot become a slave and live under the auspices and the control of a foreign nation, La Republique du Cameroon. You listen from the message from that country president. He's still alive. Dear Secretary, let's do good for the greatest number.
J'ai eu Paul Biya au téléphone avant de venir à l'Union africaine. D'abord parce que je savais qu'il ne serait pas présent. Comme je visitais un de ses voisins, il était important que nous ayons un échange. Écoutez, nous avons parlé des grands sujets en cours. Le Cameroun a clairement un défi qui est la cohésion, la stabilité de l'État. Nous savons les tensions qu'il y a dans la région anglophone. Et là aussi, j'ai apporté tout mon soutien au gouvernement pour qu'il puisse justement aller vers la stabilité. Je pense que la stabilité va aussi vers la reconnaissance, les éléments de pluralisme, parfois de décentralisation qui permettent de régler ces problèmes et ces tensions. Je pense que ce dont la région a besoin, c'est de stabilité. Et ce dont la région a besoin, c'est d'ouverture, de trouver les bons modèles de régulation. Ce n'est pas au président de la France de le dire, mais d'accompagner toutes ces réformes de décentralisation, de liberté régionale qui sont offertes dans un cadre national clair. Je pense que beaucoup de ces sujets aussi peuvent trouver une issue favorable par une meilleure intégration régionale. Et je l'ai dit, moi je crois beaucoup à la force de l'intégration régionale, pour le Nigeria comme pour le Cameroun, au sein de la CEDEAO. Et tout ce que la France peut faire pour faciliter, y compris dans le cadre d'une politique monétaire qui devrait être repensée, la France le fera.
So if you listen to the context of what he just spoken in French, and you see those are the French president, he's still in power as I'm speaking. Those are weaponry he sent, and that's the weapon they are using in killing our citizens of Southern Cameroon. Of course, a French president, as he stated that he doesn't even have power. That is not true. That is inaccurate. That is not factual. If he called Paul Biya today and asked him, this is what I want, things will change, because the ordinance signed between France, former predecessor, that is colonial territory, shall pay I don't know the word I can put. They shall be responsible for sponsoring France. And those details will be brought later. And imagine the people of Southern Cameroon. Those are weapons sent by French president and by the defense minister that are used in Southern Cameroon territory. And let's look one of the equipment. This is it. This is one of the equipment sent within the last 1 month, sent by the French president. Watch. Those are drums. Those are drums sent by Emmanuel Macron. He knew, he is aware. This is the US Congress Resolution 684. Specifically, men talk about France in particular, about the question of Southern Cameroon. Of course, they play over time and doesn't care. So long as the slaughtering of citizens of Southern Cameroon, it doesn't feel the pain as many of our brothers that we all scatter around the world, we are feeling when we look over and watch our brothers and sisters slaughtered by a country that has no legal authority over the people of Southern Cameroon. Fellow, this is an outrageous. Stay tuned, don't go away. Let me just look on the paragraph. Let me read from the US Congress resolution. It's not my resolution, it's the US Congress resolution in which is the law of these nations, and that they require that they ought to abide by it, and they are not. Let's read. Whereas the officials, I'm reading from US Congress resolution 682, or 116 Congress session, page 2 of that resolution. It says, the second paragraph, whereas the official action and policy of Francophone-dominated government of Cameroon has repressed the English-speaking Cameroonians politically, economically, throughout history of Cameroon, dating back to the reunification of the British administering Southern Cameroons and the French Cameroon under the French system in October 1961. This is not my resolution, this is US Congress. Whereas in June 1972, following a national referendum, new constitution was adopted, abolished the federal system. That was a clear plan by France in order to have access and control of the mineral they discovered in Southern Cameroon. And they cannot go through us to Southern Cameroon because of the policy and the government in place. So therefore, in order for them to strategically they have to abolish and use La Republique du Cameroon as a bridge to abolish the government of Southern Cameroon that will facilitate the France access to the mineral of Southern Cameroon. Fellow brothers and sisters, this is Southern Cameroon I am speaking. Okay, let's read the US Congress resolution. Whereas the June 1972, following the referendum, a new constitution was adopted and abolished the federal system, changed the name of the country from a Federal Republic of Cameroon to a United Republic of Cameroon, and gave additional power to the presidency. Whereas Paul Biya, the oldest head of state in Africa, has been the president for Cameroon since 1982. Since 1982, when French President Emmanuel Macron was 2 years old. Today, he is the president of France. He was 2 years old, if I'm not mistakenly, when this guy became president. Maintaining grip on power by centralizing authority in executive, undermining the constitution of Cameroon, impeding democratic governance through corrupt practices, using securities to repress the opposition, and conducting elections marred by widespread irregularities and allegation of fraud. This is U.S. Congress resolution. This is not mine. I am reading from the U.S. Congress resolution. The people of Southern Cameroon should have been part of this French neo-colonialism. If United Nations Resolution 1514 XV were fully implemented, the people of Southern Cameroon should have got their independence and continue with the democratic, effective institution in place. In fact, you also, just read a note, the Prime Ministers of Southern Cameroon, head of government of Southern Cameroon, fellow brothers and sisters, am I making sense? We cannot sustain this relationship. So it is a cosmetic for U.S. Secretary of State. It is a cosmetic to whitewash and paint the picture to reflect that the people of Southern Cameroon can live together under one umbrella. Maybe you want to shift the problem to the next new U.S. government executive, but you can stop the ball right now as we speak. The people of Southern Cameroon cannot live together with La Republique du Cameroun. I frankly speaking, the people of Southern Cameroon cannot in any circumstances live together under the one umbrella of La Republique du Cameroun. You can choose, you have the weapons, you have all the weapons in the world, and you can declare and bomb the Southern Cameroon into submission. But one thing is clear, the people want to remain independent of La Republique du Cameroun. We cannot live under the auspices and control of La Republique du Cameroun. Please. You can choose, you have the power, you have everything at your disposal, and you can do it, and nothing will happen. But I can assure you, the people of Southern Cameroon want to live independent of La Republique du Cameroun. That is the key, must be the defining moment, the defining factor. If you want peace, then look at the remote cause of the problems. Don't boycott the problem and shift to the next administration. Stay tuned.
Le feu est en train de prendre là-bas dedans. Oui, oui. Venez tout rassembler tous les matelas là. Rassembler tous les matelas, on verse à l'aide,
This is house that La Republique du Cameroun military are intentionally burned down. This is one of series of La Republique house intentionally burned in Southern Cameroon. La Republique has not in every circumstances built a house provided to the people of Southern Cameroon. This is people using their local Njangi. For anyone who understands, Njangi, local community, contribution from individuals, and that is what they use. Not from La Republique du Cameroun. In fact, La Republique Bank do not finance any business in Southern Cameroon since since this dictator became president of La Republique du Cameroun. But yet, his military is burning those houses. Mr. Secretary, the people of Southern Cameroon have got enough of this rubbish from La Republique du Cameroon. I understand your policy, but you got to understand the people of Southern Cameroon have a voice to stand up and speak. And in these matters, we cannot, in every circumstance, you can white coat the problems and shift it to the next administration after every 4 years. But one thing is clear, the people of Southern Cameroon have got enough of La Republique du Cameroon. And so, therefore, don't twist it, recognize it, and do good for the greatest number. Listen to your own former secretary.
There's tremendous interest within all branches of the U.S. government towards this crisis. The United States is greatly concerned with what's going on in Cameroon. I mean, we consider Cameroon a long-term friend. We consider it essential for the stability in that region of Africa. As we all know, Cameroon has tremendous potential. It has phenomenal natural resources, has a highly educated, industrious, entrepreneurial population. It could easily rocket forward in progress and prosperity and stability. So because of that, the United States is greatly concerned with events there. And the frustrating thing is a lot of this was needless. As I said, we all know the history, we all know where this is coming from, and the Anglophone population of Cameroon would very much like to be considered as first-class citizens, and there is a sense that they feel like, and they have felt a long time, like they're second-class citizens. It is up to dialogue and true dialogue to move this process forward.
Mildly, Cameroon is a divided country. It is divided by language, and for the past 5 years, it has been divided by a deadly civil war known as the Anglophone crisis. I want to give you some background in terms of how this war came to be. So about 80% of the people in Cameroon speak French. They control the government based in Yaoundé, and the English-speaking minority is located in the western part of the country. So relations between both sides really started to go downhill in 2016. That is when English-speaking activists made up of teachers, students, lawyers began a series of peaceful protests because they felt marginalized by the central government. The government cracked down hard, jailing several activists and killing some of the protesters, and that's when you had calls for reform turning into a full-blown revolt. English-speaking separatists ended up declaring independence, calling for their own state, which they called Ambazonia. What's followed has been this cycle of violence with thousands of people killed and 700,000 people internally displaced. Human rights groups say that the government forces have killed people indiscriminately, that they've raided villages, that they have brutalized and tortured people, but the government says that this violence is simply the result of counter-terrorism operations. Watchdog groups say that armed separatists have also committed atrocities, including deadly attacks on schools. The separatists say that they are fighting back against the education system because of the increased use of French in classrooms. In the meantime, many schools have closed, with both students and teachers too afraid to go to school. So where are we in terms of a ceasefire? Last year, government officials met with the separatist leader who was in prison, serving a life sentence for terrorism and secession, but little came of that meeting. The violence is still ongoing, and ordinary civilians are caught in the crossfire.
That was a CNN reporter on the crisis of Southern Cameroon. But I want to clarify, the United Nations Resolution 1514 called for decolonization. It did not call for partial decolonization. It called for decolonization. So the people of Southern Cameroon should have been decolonized per those resolutions. It cannot be selective, applied to a certain group. and then in no other countries. It should be equally equitable and executed.
The issue on the Anglophone piece, I won't go into detail on that. I think the article plus the video this morning did a very good job of explaining the history of how it got to the point where we are today. In October of 2017, when it came kind of to a head, the Anglophone states said we want to actually form our own state, the Ambazonia state. There have been issues there with atrocities, issues with allegations of law of war issues, and this is something that brings all this to a head. Over the last several months or so, the State Department has put on hold several security force assistance programs. Right before the election in October, I, with the ambassador, went and paid a visit with President Biya.
History has not forgotten
A very direct conversation with him with regards to investigation of these atrocities, transparency of these atrocities, and appropriate battlefield behavior. Since that time, the State Department has made a decision not to allocate significant money, but at the same time they've released some money that's been on hold to things like Scan Eagle and Cessna aircraft that assist in the Boko Haram fight in the north. We still have programs that we continue with them, all kind of small engagements as well as exercises. We talked about the state partnership program with Nebraska. We put that on hold, and in conjunction with the ambassador, AFRICOM, we decided not to pursue that because it wouldn't have been a good place for that particular group to be, so we put a halt to that. So the bottom line is right now in Cameroon, they have been a good partner with us counterterrorism-wise, but you can't neglect the fact that they have there are alleged atrocities and what's going on there. And so we continue to take our cues from the State Department and from the ambassador, and our level of engagement will continue, but not get out ahead of what the State Department would say is if we have to take other actions. We were very emphatic with President Biya that the behavior of his troops, the lack of transparency, could have a significant impact on our ability to work with them.
Right.
Entschuldigung. Herr Präsident, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen! Im anglophonen Teil Kameruns herrscht ein Bürgerkrieg inzwischen. Es ist die letzte Station eines langen Versagens der Regierung in Yaoundé, die seit 20 Jahren die versprochene und in der Verfassung verankerte Regionalisierung nicht geschafft oder auch nicht gewollt hat. Im anglophonen Teil sind jetzt die Schulen seit 2 Jahren geschlossen, Kinder werden von Militärs erschossen, alte Menschen verbrennen in von der Armee angezündeten Häusern, 300.000 sind auf der Flucht im eigenen Land, 30.000 sind schon nach Nigeria geflohen. Und die Felder einer ganz, ganz fruchtbaren Gegend werden nicht mehr bestellt, der Hunger wird folgen. Wir sehen, wir driften in eine humanitäre Katastrophe. Und Deutschland leistet seit 50 Jahren Entwicklungszusammenarbeit mit Kamerun. Und trotz aller Gelder, nicht nur von Deutschland, sondern multilateral, ist es nicht gelungen, das Land entscheidend zu stabilisieren. Und die Bundesregierung, da muss ich Ihnen ein bisschen widersprechen, Herr Frey, bemüht sich zu wenig und vor allem viel zu spät um Prävention von Konflikten in Afrika insgesamt. Diese Konflikte sind absehbar und sie sind ausrechenbar. Aber es wird, wie gesagt, viel zu langsam reagiert, wenn überhaupt, so auch in der Kamerun-Krise. Wir hatten unseren Antrag ja schon im Juni eingebracht und sind jetzt froh, dass wir endlich das debattieren können. Warum wird der Werkzeugkasten zur Krisenprävention nicht rechtzeitig ausgepackt? Wo waren die Bemühungen oder Erfolge der Bundesregierung, eine EU-Initiative dazu auf den Weg zu bringen? Wo sind die Bemühungen Deutschlands im Sicherheitsrat, um diese humanitäre Katastrophe noch zu verhindern oder zumindest zu mildern? Wo ist der multilaterale Druck? Und der Konflikt im anglophonen Teil Kameruns ist ein völlig überflüssiger, grausamer, blutiger Konflikt. und das allerletzte, was diese arme Bevölkerung dort brauchen kann. Aber es ist kein Ende in Sicht. Dabei sind die Anliegen der anglophonen Bevölkerung durchaus berechtigt. Die Vorrednerin hat es durchaus richtig erwähnt. Und die Lösung kann aber nur in einer Art Regionalisierung oder in einer Art föderalen Prinzip liegen. Und Deutschland hat ganz gute Erfahrungen gemacht, Föderalismus und mit regionaler Selbstverwaltung. Und deshalb kann sich Deutschland als Vermittler deutlich besser anbieten, als das bisher geschehen ist, beziehungsweise gar nicht passiert ist. Am letzten Sonntag haben die Kameruner einen neuen Präsidenten gewählt und es wird noch 14 Tage dauern, bis ausgezählt ist. Dann wird der 85-jährige Anführer, der es vorzieht, mehrere Monate außer Landes in ganze Stockwerken von 5-Sterne-Hotels zu wohnen, wieder zum Präsidenten erklärt werden. Und von den 24 Millionen Kamerunern waren nur 6,5 Millionen für die Wahl registriert und im anglophonen Teil fand die Wahl eigentlich nicht statt. Und eine Wahl, die keine faire ist, in einem Rechtsstaat, die keiner ist, kann man eigentlich nicht akzeptieren. Daher muss die internationale Gemeinschaft eine Übergangsphase nach der Wahl aushandeln, in der die nationale Versöhnung ermöglicht wird und vielleicht auch ein Rückzug des Präsidenten.
On the 7th of June this year, the Guardian newspaper ran a special feature on the brutal campaign of violence by the regime of Cameroon's President Biya against English-speaking communities in the west of the country, which were formerly known as British Cameroon, communities to whom we owe a historic responsibility. They quoted in The Guardian the ordinary men and women who saw their villages attacked by Biya's military, who saw their neighbours and family members killed, and that they were forced to flee for their lives. They quoted the charity workers who were looking after thousands of displaced women and children for whom they warned going home would be suicide. Now, by any normal moral standard, you would expect the UK government to read those reports and be appalled. But not this government. The very next day, after that report was published, the British Trade Secretary announced a £1.5 billion deal with a British national gas company and President Biya's regime. A deal which, in the words of the Trade Department's press release, will, quote, generate a huge stream of revenue for Cameroon's public treasury. In other words, we have a regime ranked as the 25th most corrupt in the world, a ruler in his 43rd year of autocratic power, with a personal wealth of over $200 million, engaged in a systematic campaign of brutality and killings against English-speaking community in his country, and all the government can do is boast of doing trade deals which will only enrich him further. That, in my mind, is what this government means by global Britain.
And had established some Potemkin institutions that weren't really doing anything to bring the two sides together. Could you elaborate on that, because you ran out of time before?
Sure, yes, sir. I understand the Cameroonian government established several commissions, and I'm sorry, I don't know the exact name of it, whether it's the Multicultural Institution for National Reconciliation or something, which on the face of it, and there have been a couple of these, but they have not been provided adequate budget, and they have not really done anything, because what the country needs more than anything else is a genuine, open dialogue, probably to include the diasporas of the Cameroonians, because they have a great deal of interest in this. Because, sir, what's happening, both sides are becoming further and further radicalized. Unfortunately, I believe that the president of Cameroon is being told by his hardliners that he can win this thing militarily. There is no way that they're going to win this militarily. The violence is going to get worse in the northwest and the southwest. The arm for an arm, literally an eye for an eye, and the whole world will be blind there. The violence will spread to the West Province. It may even spread to the Littoral Province, which is the large city of Douala. So there has to be something. We are very, very energetically speaking with our allies. That's why I said that we just had in the Security Council this Monday what the United Nations calls an ARIAS, where it's an open debate, and it's so clear that everybody wants to move forward on this. Are sanctions on the table? Everything's on the table moving forward. But we have to bring this situation to an end. Else, there's a possibility of what happened in Nigeria with Boko Haram. Started as a small movement, and now look at it. And it'd be disastrous for the region if the Cameroon government turned this thing into yet another type of Boko Haram.
Or Boko Haram could come back into Cameroon. Well, how do you mentioned, that it appears to be spiraling out of control because the more the security forces clamp down, the more resistance there is in the Anglophone region. So what can we do that we're not already doing?
Well, like I said, the best we can do for right now is just work with our allies to really make the Cameroonian government understand the need for a real dialogue. And if that doesn't happen relatively quickly, then we have to look at the array of other tools we have in our toolkit, because, frankly, the possibility of sanctions is always there. But it's always better to work in concert with our friends before we go in that direction, because the frustrating thing is it is in the interest of everybody to have a national dialogue. The situation will not end militarily. Each day, the atrocities will get worse and worse.
Is permanent separation of the two regions a possibility?
Sir, I don't believe so, because
I'd really refer to you, the ambassador to Cameroon, to speak for the response of the U.S. government in his country. But we still have partnerships with the Cameroonian military that have been very effective. They've been very good partners, and we will continue those relationships for some time.
They are also committing human rights abuses. There are, for example, allegations that they are killing people in Anglophone region. How do you feel when you support the military that commit such crimes?
Well, we certainly take very seriously any allegations of human rights violations by any of our partner militaries or security forces. And we expect those allegations to be investigated and appropriate action to be taken against any of those who conduct human rights violations. We, as a military activity, ensure that the forces that we work with, first of all, have no credible accusations of human rights violations as a matter of U.S. law. And when we do train with partner nations anywhere in Africa or anywhere else in the world, we conduct human rights training and training in the law of armed conflict as a matter of course, and ensure that our partner forces don't conduct human rights violations.
Thank you for watching. This is Comrade Fontan Daniel speaking live here this evening from the great state of Texas, here in the United States, on the state of Southern Cameroons Ambazonia, the quest for sovereignty. And I wish you all a happy good night. And tomorrow is Monday, and the beginning of the next activities.